The sun, exhausted from baking the air all day, had blushed when dusk invited it to retire on the horizon. Scorched breezes had writhed to escape the descending sun, whisking and whipping apart the line of the horizon once drawn so sharp and strong. The bleached sand of the desert floor bled into the pale hem of the blue sky, and somewhere in the folds of that smudged, befuddled distance the sun had tucked itself, almost more to vanish than to set. Having started with the first zephyr that heralded the dusk, they drove through the sun's setting and the skies dressing itself in the star-beaded shawl of the night. They rode the waves of sand for hours, sick with vertigo from the slow drifting, pitching, and swelling. One last dune, however, the cart did not climb, stalling instead, weary, at the base of the grade. Tarakan and Nesu leapt from the wagon and left parallel tracks as they hiked to perch the dune. They reminisced as they stared across the panorama laid out before them, and traded knowing glances. The heat of the day roiled the air, and the dune's basins would flood with illusory pools deep enough to drown sight of the redcaps swimming within. Without the insulation of clouds, however, that heat evaporated with the sun, and the basins would be sipped dry to reveal their danger. In the dark of the night, the muted oranges and browns of the redcaps' red caps were almost black. Moonlight sparkled the sand as it was heaved up and trickled off over writhing furrows, betraying the scavengers among the hovels and divots. They clamored around their pits like ants, scratching and scraping with their blood-crusted nails and dusted, calloused hands. The population teemed and brimmed out of the hazardous networks of burrows, fated to collapse under the weight of anything that tread over them. "How did we get out of that?" Tarakan whimpered into the night. "How will we get into that?" Nesu countered. Beyond the holes and topographic bowls stood tall walls steeped in sloping stacks of sand. Eons of desert winds washed waves of sand against the castle's battlements, but the walls would not be drowned. The toothed crenellations peeked over the swells, swimming strong and defiant against the currents of erosion and time. "The real question is how you will get out of that." The voice trembled with such a thunderous bass that it should have betrayed their position, but not a single redcap in the valley below seemed to search their way. Tarakan and Nesu turned to the demon that interrupted their conversation, the behemoth Orkan. "Are you sure you can only help us once?" Tarakan asked. "I will only help you once," Orkan confirmed. "Rusty is set on leaving, and I may only intercept her in the time between when I stop time and the time that you start it again." "By the Tawash, this is complex," Tarakan mused. "All right, let me see if I have this right. You will give us a moment like you did in the valley. In that moment, we will have to make our way into the Vorsan castle, find Draco, and free him?" "Yes," Orkan appended. "But the moment you disturb anything, whether it is to free Draco or remove an obstacle, you will be in a different moment than the one I can give you. It will start time for you again. From that moment, you will have to fight your way out of the castle, away from the redcaps, and out of the Vorsan on your own." "We are most humbly grateful for your interceding on our behalf, Tawesh Orkan," Nesu praised. Orkan laughed. "Only with the divine intervention could this feat be accomplished. You are right to praise me." The demon spared them no pride. They skid back down the slope to join the others at the cart. The condition of the coterie was still sick, but recovering. Eloise looked frazzled, but was conscious. Darrell was unconscious, dead weight after having sacrificed his worth in their last escape. His efforts, however, had made them smile, lent him traits they wanted to save and honor upon their return. They forgave him for this round, and prayed the Tawesh would too be so merciful. Rusty smiled when Orkan returned, and pounced to perch his shoulder as soon as he was in range. Her weight was feather-light draped across him, no more inconvenient than a cape or shawl. Cassandra peeked from beneath the cowl of Nesu's loaned cloak, bedecking her with all the darkness the human fables credited to the witch's lineage. "Thank you, Rusty," Cassandra chimed. "I'm going to miss you." "Oh, child!" Rusty was struck by the emotion. Orkan had for so long removed any moment of longing and missing from her life that she had nearly missed any sympathy for their parting. She leapt down from Orkan and wrapped Cassandra in a short embrace. It has been such a pleasure to meet the heir of the Hexen curse. Bear it well, child. Rusty closed, pinching Cassandra's chin and gifting her a confident smile. She then bound back to Orkan's shoulder, silent through the next exchange. Then we are ready. Nesu cued the execution of their plan. Everyone on the cart. Nikan, take the reins, Terrakan ordered. I will unlock you in the moment shortly, Orkan began, and draw a path in the sand for you to drive to the castle. Once you are inside, I will try to remove as many redcaps as I can, and you will have to look for Draco. Remember, disturb nothing lest you start time again. If and when you find Draco, the moment you free him is the moment the redcaps will be free to attack. I will be gone by the time you bridge the moments, and your escape is up to you alone. Cassandra, this is your last chance. Are you sure that this is what you want? It was not a measure of life to life, not a choice between Terrakan and Draco, or Nesu and Draco, herself and Draco. It was a choice between listening to black magic or listening to reason. The mystic had said not to be burdened by his silence, but she was burdened by his screams that, according to the mystic, she would not have heard if he was dead. Every event she endured since her capture was resolved in her surrender to the whims of black magic. This attempt was a pilgrimage fueled by the senseless pursuit of blind faith, a trait treasured so deeply in every fable that passed her way, and too ingrained in who she wanted to be to ignore. This was not what she wanted. This is what was wanted of her, and that sacrifice was something with which she was content to settle. Content? She, Cassandra, the cursed princess of Hexen, was content? Do it. Cassandra commanded the demon in an overthrow of their hierarchic order. As a result, time submitted itself to the will of the witch. Orkan threw back his head in a wild bellow that resonated through the distance. The vibrato crashed against the stir in the present, wrestled it into submission, stilled it. Diadra's javelin, the gash in the heavens that bled stars, stopped mid-flight. Rusty, Nesu, Nikan, Cassandra, Terrakan, Eloise, Daryl, Ramses hitched beside the cart. And lastly the two unicorns in tow with the cart. Orkan unlocked them, one after the other, verifying shortly with each as they gathered their senses in the still of the night. In witness, they were not disturbed at all, each waking only to find Orkan having teleported to their side and the stars suddenly, noticeably, still. Nikan, guide the unicorns carefully behind me. I will release the sand so that your tread will not disturb the still of the moment. And so Orkan began carving their path through the present, sweeping the sand alive under their wheels. The cart's wheels churned forward with their squeaking song. They strode around the ridge on the most level grades they could, maneuvering to avoid an avalanche in the sand that might tip the cart or unwittingly collapse the moment Orkan had stilled. Up one slope, then down the ridge, they strolled into the valley of craters and bowls that pock the desert around the castle. Time's pause was deafening compared to the screams they heard the last time their eyes had traced the features of these bloodlusting gorillas. Their faces were just as unique as any population's, but it was the grotesque differences from the standard human face encountered in daily life that truly unnerved, especially now as the cart wove slowly between the redcaps' hovels, allowing a closer examination. Their desiccated lips had shriveled back from their recessed gums and fanged grins. Their leathery skin pulled taut the lids from their bloodshot eyes, and irises burned pinpoint thin. Their path was lit by moonlight, caught on the whites of their eyes. It blazed in contrast to the desert's darkness. Particularly disturbing were the redcaps, for whom time had stopped at an exact point that posed them to stare at the cart as it passed. Fear mused in the passengers' minds whether or not these redcaps were conscious of the cart's passing. Some were naked, some wore boots. The most amazing were those who seemed to have found themselves dressed in whole suits of plate armor or shirts of mail. Could the desiccated intelligence of a redcap actually concentrate long enough to conquer the riddle of a belt buckle, latch, or tie? No matter their taste in dress, however, each bore on its brow a scrap of fabric of blotted, muted browns. Some were long, swirled up in a turban that might at any moment tumble apart. Others wore only scraps that could be used for little more than wiping sweat from a brow, or more darkly, wiping on blood. Most, however, had folded bandanas with long strips tailing down their back, and rivulets of clotted blood streaming down the contours of their gnarled, frenzied faces. The cart carried them closer to the walls, whose height only grew as they approached, soon towering over them with such measures that their necks strained to keep them in sight. The contents of those broad square towers and the massive curtain walls was an absolute mystery soon to be solved. "Is there a gate?" Terracon asked. "Even if there was, it might be buried by a mound of sand, or so well preserved that we might never break through," Eloise countered disparagingly. Cassandra could not stomach any more discouragement. The approach to the castle had not necessarily impressed, as she had explored such ruins before. Those explorations had taken days, weeks, however. Even if these towers were intact within, their full exploration was beyond their best efforts in their weakened condition. There has to be a way in. The Redcaps could have built their hive anywhere in the entire desert, but there is something about this castle that keeps them here, Cassandra mused aloud. They occupied this area for so long. They know a way in. Cassandra was certain. "Well, we dare not wake them up to show us," Nesu said. "We will need to discover it on our own." "There!" Eloise cried suddenly, pointing to the wall. They followed her line of sight. The embankments of a hovel had buried their noticing earlier, but it was clear on their approach. Treading feet had worn clear a dugout that led to a simple gate. The doors had long been torn from their hinges, and they lay dead on either side, out of the way of the foot traffic. Good eye, Orkhan led their way, sweeping clear their path with his tail. They wheeled around a redcap who blocked their path and navigated to avoid the places under which the burrows seemed to cross. Orkhan led them down the slope of sand and under the gate. An arc of stones bore the weight of the wall above, but the gate was otherwise indistinguishable. There was no gatehouse or barbican, no constable's balcony or machicolations. There was not a single suggestion that this was a gate, a point of penetration. There was only a vaulted hallway that passed at ground level from the desert to the ward within. They crossed under the lintel, between the doors that had fainted to flank their path, and into the stone corridor. The architectural defenses neglected outside the lintel were more than made up for within the corridor. Deterrents were pocketed along the entire length of the hall. Archers' loops speckled the walls, and murder holes spotted the stone ceiling. "Pray nothing is occupying the second floor on our way out," Terracon quipped as he studied the chutes. They breached the gate at the far end of the corridor, flanked again by fallen doors, and passed into the courtyard. The complex was wide. There were no redcaps inside the ward, and the contrast to the population outside rendered the cobblestone plaza, spanning wall to wall, disturbingly vacant. Some sand had managed to breach the walls, pitched over by gales rarely possible in the desert's vacuum, and heaped in snaking ridges no taller than a man. Generally spared the massive piles, the walls within seemed even higher than they had from without. There were two other gates, one north and one south. The southern gate seemed clear. The northern was completely blocked by a tongue of sand it belched across the cobblestone ward. A western gate would have been useless, as the westerly winds would have made it excessively prone to the fate that had eventually sealed the northern gate. Some sections of curtain wall were cut by arcades, possibly once used to stable mounts or beasts of burden. Iron grills were fastened in the arched windows, scattered amongst the higher floors. The broad, square towers evenly spaced along the wall were each built with a single door at its base. Paramount in the ward, however, was an enormous square keep crowned with battlements. Lancet windows were scattered sparsely and without pattern across its walls. Entry was suggested where two opposing ramps and a bretach framed an arched door a full story above the ground. "Where do we start?" Eloise asked. The keep? Nesu shouted, astonished. You are in the military, you should know this. Capture the command tower and you capture the castle. Consider this a siege. Their approach revealed details of the tower's defensive strategy. There was no floor before the door. Instead, each ramp led to a landing that concluded in a series of corbels. Once upon a time, a drawbridge would have been suspended over the corbels to admit entry. Anyone who attempted to enter would have to ascend a ramp and then make a sharp turn on the drawbridge to pass beneath the arch. Closing the drawbridge would leave a gap between the landings, which, when taken with the perpendicular setting of the ramps, made an assault by battering ram impossible. These hypothetical plans were now complicated by the drawbridge having collapsed ages ago, leaving the door a gap, but without a floor on which to approach it. Damn, Terracon chirped. How do we get in there? The defenses impressed Terracon, but befuddled his solution to accessing the open door. We cannot all clear that distance, Terracon grumbled, pointing out the breadth they would need to jump from the ramp to the door. You will not necessarily have to, Orcon said, then invited Nesu to his arm and lifted the vizier to the second floor's open door. He returned for Cassandra and commented, When you want to get down, you will have to jump. Eloise can hide the cart behind one of these arches until you come back. Orcon offered his arm to Terracon. The captain hugged the wrist, then let the demon shove him up to the door. Terracon pulled himself onto the sill. Nicken was the last to join them. Head out the south gate, Orcon closed. I will clear as much of a path as I can. Then you need only keep the castle at your back. Thank you, Orcon, Cassandra beamed from beneath her cowl. The demon smiled back. Remember, disturb nothing. Now go, he ushered as though they might run out of time. Cassandra turned on her heel, hungry for what lay buried in this ruin. They were swallowed up by shadows. Eloise patted the hind of the unicorns with the whip, teasing them into the arch beneath the ramp. South gate, you said? Eloise asked suddenly. Orcon had already begun to trot away, but turned back startled. Yes, south gate. Make it easy, Lord Orcon, Eloise begged. Shivering paranoia had betrayed her fragility. Darrell was barely alive, much less company, so she would be alone with the memories from her last rampant ride across the infested desert. She did not want to find herself in a sinkhole with those leathery fingers scratching at her back again. Orcon took pity. Here, let me help. With a soft brush of his black claw against her cheek, she was stilled. Orcon had put Eloise back in the moment, had sealed away the spare chances in which her fears could have matured. Orcon went further, and spared the unicorns and Darrell the extra moments as well. His last words he let hang in the air until the next moment came where they could be heard. You will wake once the moments have been bridged.